come back. So we look at concluding the Gospel of John by looking at how he recalls those last days, the last hours of Jesus, his passion, his death, resurrection. So obviously we look at the last few chapters, chapters 18 to 21 of John. Now, chapters 13 through 17 are what's known as the high priestly prayer of Jesus at the Last Supper. But as I said in the previous class, there is no institution narrative for the Eucharist. Remember that John is writing after the other synoptics. John is always, there is no scholar, except perhaps the craziest or most far-fetched, who argue that John is even in the same time period, let alone the earliest of the Gospels. Why? Because he always seems to fill in some of the gaps. Kind of saying, almost kind of like an old timer, like, oh, I remember this. That silly old Luke said that, but I remember it this way. It's not in contradiction. It's not in competition either. I don't think it sounds, but it is kind of complementary. So it adds to what they're saying. Yes.
I never quite understood that. He's one of the apostles.
It's not necessarily clear from the gospel why he does that. It just seems that he felt, was called, led by the Spirit to do it at a later point. It's not. So he doesn't, he doesn't contradict anything that Matthew says. Matthew's an apostle as well, so he doesn't contradict any of that. It's more of just, here's. You can also see it. I think as I mentioned that. And especially that prologue seems to highlight that well. This comes up after much reflection, prayer, consideration about what John had seen. Now, maybe it took him longer. John is usually said to be the youngest of the apostles. If you look at imagery, he's usually the only one in most traditional Christian imagery of the Last Supper, for example. He's usually the only one who doesn't have a beard. So it's showing he's not necessarily a fully aged man, the prime of his virility or something like that. Beards in ancient culture are a sign of virility and strength. But John is just too young. Still, he doesn't have any stubble on him yet. So you could say that he needed to reflect and understand and ponder and draw out more of what he saw. Reflecting, perhaps 40 to 50 years after what happened, to say, here's what it is. Or, as I said before, to kind of say, here's some more that you didn't get that needs to be said. That kind of helped. But again, not in competition, not in contradiction. Complementarity. It's working together. So, beginning chapter 18, we hear about Jesus going to the garden. Yet we do not hear about him doing any sort of prayer or agony. There's no sort of, there's no recollection of Jesus praying 3 times and crying out, or sweating blood, or sweating profusely in any way. Jesus is in the garden. We see a little bit of emphasis on Judas. Judas goes there because Judas understands Jesus goes there often. Judas follows him. We see that Ego and me saying, They translate, this is the RFE, the Revised Standard. They translate it as I am he. As I said, you can see it just says in the Greek, ego, eimi. So they're drawn. We see some of a tussle, a fight here. Verses 10 and following. Simon Peter has a sword. He strikes the high priest's ear off. The high priest's slave. Peter cuts off his right ear. They begin to fight. Jesus tells Peter to stop. He says, "What are you doing? Don't do that." No. This is why I'm here. Shall I not be? Kind of referencing the agony as portrayed in other Gospels. Shall I not drink the cup which the Father has given me? Remember, in the Synoptics, he prays, let this chalice pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. So John, referencing, though he doesn't directly state it, he says, shall I not drink the cup? In this account, Jesus is first taken to Annas. Who is this Annas? He is the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Who is this Caiaphas? The Caiaphas was the high priest. Now, earlier in the gospel, and verse 14 here alludes to it, earlier in the gospel, the Sanhedrin, the high council of priests, are meeting. Caiaphas is the high priest. He is the one who is kind of the overseer. He does the major sacrifices, the major ceremonies. Caiaphas makes a prophecy, and almost kind of in an accidental way. Caiaphas gives counsel that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Caiaphas says that. In the context that they are afraid of losing their nation. So it's better that this Jesus dies than that they lose the nation. In a sense, he speaks prophetically, though that's not really his intention. So there's this sort of pre-trial. Annas had been high priest before. So he knew some of that. A more learned man, perhaps a wiser one, since with great age. So Jesus is questioned by Annas first. We still get a recollection in here of Peter's betrayal. We talked about that. Peter goes in, he's waiting by a fire. A maid comes up and says, Aren't you one of his disciples? Aren't you one of Jesus' disciples? And Peter, in almost kind of a contradiction to Jesus' echoing these things, I am not. Non eimi. I am not. I'm not what you say that I am. Annas continues to question Jesus. Jesus, is just saying, I've spoken to him. What are you asking about? Everything I've talked about has been openly proclaimed. Why are you doing this like this? And that it gets him a strike by one of the officers, one of the soldiers. Like, how dare you disrespect him? And of course, they called him high priest. Not because once you're a high priest, you've claimed that high priest for a while, even after your term is done. Jesus rebukes that officer. He says, if I've spoken wrongly, bear witness to the wrong. If I spoke rightly, why do you strike me? Jesus didn't say anything wrong there. The officer was more concerned with rank. Then Jesus goes to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin for the trial, and we see Simon Peter is again accosted, aren't you one of them? No, I am not. And in fact, an interesting point John brings up. Now, John would know, because John was in there. Was in there. One of the servants of the high priest, a kinsman, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter just again was blowing off. No, I'm not. What are you talking about? Prophecy of Jesus comes true. We do not hear about the trial before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. We get to verse 28 here. They lead him to the praetorium. This is where Pilate is, the Roman governor. John makes an interesting note. They did not enter the praetorium so that they might not be defiled, might eat the Passover. Why? The praetorium they treat almost as a foreign temple, a place of worship of another god. So they do not enter in there because they would be ritually defiled. So Pilate must come out to them. What do you say? And Pilate says. And they just, you feel almost, Pilate in this sense is almost like, I know what your name is. Why do you bring him forward? And they're like, well, if you weren't an evildoer, why would you bring him? Why would you bring him before you? Kind of poking at them for what they're doing. Judging by your own law. You know why? Because the matter does not concern Pilate. Again, Pilate's only concerned about keeping the peace. This is a religious matter. This is a matter of arguing, who's God, who's God, who offended God, and how, or whatnot. But they emphasize that he needs to be put to death. It is not lawful for us to put any man to death. They're telling this to Pilate, remind him, hey, it's your duty. You have to kill him. You're in charge. We're technically not. So Pilate straight up asks him, are you the king of the Jews? Remember, that's the charge that they brought in the other accounts. John does not deny that's what they said. Are you the king of the Jews? Pilate wants him to say it, so that if Jesus says, yep, I am, he can therefore blame him for treason and say, well, I guess I have to kill him. Jesus kind of pokes at him. Do you say this of their own, or do others? Is this what others say about me? Pilate says, well, I am Jew. I'm not one of you. What have you done? He's still kind of curious. He's like, what are you? What have you done? I've heard so many things about it. What have you done to make them mad at you? And Jesus then says, my kingship is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, that I might not be handed over. But my kingship is not from the world. Pilate then asked him, oh, you are a king. Jesus agrees. You said it. You said it. I am a king. Everyone, I have come into the world, it says, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate asks the great question, what is truth? In his Latin, he would have said, quid est veritas? Quid est veritas? Some in medieval would turn it around would be vir qui honest. I think I might have that part. What is truth? The man who is present. Pilate and that great sort of apology. What is truth? I don't care about truth. Truth doesn't matter. Thus implying, implicating himself in this. We then hear again of Jesus being offered as a substitution for Barabbas. But the crowd cries out and wants Jesus crucified, so they crucify him. Pilate first scourges him, as we said. And then a great line here that is often done in art. Behold the man. In Latin, ecce homo. Behold the man. You will see this motif in Christian art, this image of Jesus being presented. So he's presented, he's got a crown of thorns on his head, he's in a purple robe, he's been scourged. So it's almost an image of contrasts. These kind of royal symbols and yet these symbols of suffering at the same time. Some of them are done in a very realistic scene. As if, Pilate standing there going, here you go, ecce homo, behold the man, here he is. Here's your king. Some of them are just an image of Jesus, how they would portray him with these features. The crowd cries out for his blood, crucify him, crucify him. Pilate says, I have nothing to charge him with. John makes this interesting statement of the Jews answering, we have a law, by that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. A title that would attribute one with divinity. Like I said, blasphemy. When Pilate heard these words, he was more afraid. I want you to think about that. John is implying there was already some fear in Pilate. But he seems to be more afraid. Turning to Jesus and drilling it into him. Where are you from? Now, we have some evidence of Pilate's existence, obviously, beyond the New Testament. He's not a kind man. He can be very vicious. So it is all the more striking that Pilate has fear and is almost desperately asking Jesus, where are you from? As if trying to avoid what is about to happen. Jesus says nothing here. Pilate says, what? You won't speak to me? Do you not know what I can do? Like almost kind of pleading with him.
So Pilate here is not so much afraid of the crowd, or perhaps it's that as well, but it also seems like he's afraid of Jesus in a sense because of what Jesus said in the room.
Yeah. Well, it could be a multitude of things. I don't think it's necessarily the crowd. I think you're right that in some sense it is Jesus. Like, who is this man? He's heard of this man. Jesus is very popular in this area right now. He's a very popular man. So Pilate has heard about him in some way. And yet Pilate cannot find any reason to actually kill him. It's not like Pilate couldn't try. He baited him on. Are you the king of the Jews? If you say you're the king of the Jews, then I have to kill you because you're claiming to not be in service to Caesar. But he doesn't. He says he's a king, but not necessarily the Jews. Sorry.
So, as I was saying along the lines and is he afraid of the answer being where he's asking where are you from, and if the answer is being pattern?
I think he's more afraid of not necessarily, some interpretation perhaps. I think what he is afraid of is that he does not want to do what the crowd wants him to do, as much as he's a politician. I think even as much as he says, what is truth and all of that, he's still struck in some way by this Jesus. There is something unique and different about this Jesus. This man has no crime against him, at least in Pilate's juridical sense. He's committed no crime. Whatever his complaint about, the Jewish complaint about him calling himself the Son of God, that doesn't matter to Pilate. In a juridical sense, that's not a crime against Rome. But in a sense, he seems to be hungry. He seems to be recognizing something more is happening here. Something more is going on here. He almost seems to be resisting. We see here, like I said, in verse 10, he says, "Do you not have? I have the power to release you, and I have the power to crucify you." Jesus turns back and he says, "You would have it. You would not have it unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Jesus almost, in a sense, you could say, kind of alleviates Pilate's conscience. It's like, you're not committing the greatest sin here. It's not necessarily saying you're doing a good thing. I don't think it's something like that. He's saying, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. Who is that? The chief priest, the high priest. The one who should know the scriptures. Yes.
Not just that, but it seems like he's kind of appealing to Pilate's pride, or just simply saying, or I'm sure Pilate would hear from this, that he had been given authority from God. If you have the power over me, it's been given you from above, which kind of explains why Pilate then tries to release him once again. Mm-hmm. And it says sought, which kind of implies that he really just wanted to get him out of the building.
Out of the mess. Yeah. Well, there could be a couple different interpretations. Giving you from above. You don't have it of yourself. You got it from another. In this case, at a minimum, you could say, Caesar gave it to you.
Could it also be that he's referencing Judas, since technically he delivered?
I would say no, because Judas doesn't necessarily have authority. In that particular context, who directly gave Jesus over to Pilate? It's the chief priests, the high priest, and the chief priests. They're the ones who gave him over, because they're the ones who are accusing him. He only has authority because he has authority to rule over cases. So that's the only way that Pilate can rule in this place, or judge. That's why, right here, verse 12, Pilate seeks to release him. The crowd rises up. You are not the friend of Caesar. Those are not words that any Roman politician wants to hear. All of them want to be the friend of Caesar. The amicus Caesari. Everyone who makes himself a king sets himself up against Caesar. And Pilate almost kind of tries it again, kind of in a softer way. 14 now, he says, "Behold your king." They call again, "Crucify him, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar." We have no king but Caesar. Even though God is supposed to be their true king, they take up instead the emperor. So then Pilate gets up and says, "All right, good." They take him up there. Remember, we talked about the titulus, the title card that states the crime for which Jesus was crucified. We see here 19, verses 19, chapter 19, verses 19 and 20. Pilate also wrote a title, titulus, and it read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, so it's a very public place. The three languages, Hebrew, Latin, Greek. The three great languages of the world, of that world, and that place. Hebrew, the language of the people; Latin, the language of the empire; Greek, the language of culture and general communication. Now the chief priests get upset and say, don't write that, but that this man said, I am the King of the Jews. They want him to be accused of saying that he said it, not that he is. Pilate says, quote scripsi, sic scripsi. When I have written, I have written. So giving up Jesus' garments, we see again the group of people who are there. Verses 25 and following. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary, wife of Clovis, Mary Magdalene. An interesting point here, 26 and 27. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. He said to the disciple, Behold your mother. From that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Why does Jesus do this? In the first place, it's the duty of the male heir to care for one's mother. Jesus has no siblings. Because if he did, he wouldn't have to do this. So Jesus is an only child, the only son of Mary. So it is, he tells him, Behold your son. This is who I'm entrusting you to. To that disciple, it says, Behold your mother. She is your mother. You must take care of her. So in one sense, again, affirming one of the central doctrines, central Christian doctrines, not just Catholic, but Christians that believe in the centuries of the virginity of Mary. And the only child she had was Jesus. But also in a spiritual sense, who is the disciple whom Jesus loved? John. It is John. Who is the other disciple that Jesus loved? It is every disciple. Jesus loves every one of his disciples. Now, obviously, the love that he has for John is far more unique. Personal friendship. But Jesus loves every one of his disciples. So in a way, this is seen as an affirmation of the devotion or honor that Catholics practice in accord with Mary. And I want to be clear about that. Devotion, not worship. Worship is what one does to a God. So you may worship the God of the Jews, the God of Jesus Christ, the gods of the Egyptians, the gods of the Greeks, the gods of the Romans. Devotion is a lesser act. It is not one done to a God. Catholics do not worship Mary as a God. She is seen as being the best of human beings after Jesus, but still a human being. passage is seen as being said to every disciple. Woman, behold your son. That Mary becomes the spiritual mother of every disciple of Jesus. And that all of them are to hold her closely as their own mother. Nothing more than that. Some people are like, oh, Catholics say it's the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and Mary. No, not at all. But here we see some of our justification for some of the minor practices that we do to Mary. Some take it to extremes, but that doesn't make it right. So Jesus ends it with two words. I thirst, to which he is given some vinegar, some base wine, and then it is finished. It is brought to a conclusion. Everything that he had been working towards, everything that he had said, proclaimed, and prophesied, is brought to this moment. In, I believe, the Latin is translated as consummatum est. It is consummated, it is brought to its full completion. Nothing more is to be done. And hence, having said that, Jesus bows his head, gives up his spirit. He dies. Now, Jews do not like, did not, obviously crucifixion doesn't happen today, Jews did not like bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath, especially for feast days. So they began hastening the death of those who were being crucified. So you see here, verse 32, soldiers came, they broke the legs of the first one crucified with Jesus and of the other one. Why? To speed up the process. They die quickly, so they can be taken off. They're not supposed to come off the cross alive. I don't think anybody would want to anyway. They come to Jesus, though, and Jesus, they see, is already dead. So they don't break his legs, but they want confirmation that he's dead. So one of the soldiers, one of the centurions, with expert skill, Brian's job, to confirm it, he takes his spear and he shoves it up into the side, in between the ribs, to pierce the heart, to test and see. What comes out are blood and water. And John alludes to two scriptures. He alludes to Psalm 22 here. Not a bone of him shall be broken. And then another prophecy here, they shall look on him whom they have pierced. The other great imagery that is not alluded to out of this blood and water is a prophecy in Ezekiel. Who talks about blood and water coming out of the right side of the temple. And that all who are covered by this blood and water will be given life. So it will be later interpreted as the opening of the temple, that is the body of Jesus. Remember, he called his own body a temple. Destroy this temple, and I will raise it in 3 days. We hear then the burial story, same as the others. Joseph of Arimathea has that tomb. allows them to place the body in there. They rush to do it. They lay Jesus in there, roll the stone over, and continue. Chapter 20. We get some more unique appearances of the resurrection of Jesus in John than in the other ones. The first part is the empty tomb, verses 1 through 10. Mary Magdalene goes by herself, John writes. And he says early, he said, while it was still dark, so the sun had not even yet risen. She runs back, she tells Simon Peter and the others. Actually, only one other is mentioned, the one whom Jesus loved. They have taken the body of my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. One says funny, one says she's very panicked. So then there's a race to the tomb. Peter and the other disciple run. The other disciple gets there first. Again, an implication that John is a young man. He can outrun the old man Peter. So the young man, John, gets there first. He sees the clothes. He does not go in. He waits. He yields for his superior, Simon Peter. Once Simon Peter gets there, Peter goes in first, and then John. And an interesting note, they see the linen cloths, and also John mentions the napkin. Remember I talked about the sudarium, or sudarium. That's that particular, it was a custom in that culture to place a specific cloth over the face. You can see that sometimes in movies, maybe older movies. That the face is kind of covered, particularly on its own, after one has shortly died. That napkin, that sudarium, that had on his head, is not lined with the linen cloth, but rolled up in a place by itself. Sounds just like what one might do. Take it off your face first, throw it in the corner, then throw these other cloths off. John makes an interesting note, though. He talks about believing, but he said they did not know the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. They go back and they're like, well, that's all. They don't seem to do much more. But Mary stays there, Mary Magdalene. She's weeping, she's sad. One that she's believed and followed so well is gone. She sees two angels. That doesn't seem to faze her, though. They're like, why are you crying? She says the same thing. They've taken the body of my Lord. I don't know where they put it. I don't know where it is. Suddenly she sees Jesus, but she does not recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. Says she's right. Spiritually. Jesus says, why are you weeping? Why are you sad? You can almost hear the desperation. If you've taken it, give it back to me. I want it back. You hear the panic, the deep cry in her voice as she says that. Jesus just says for me, Mary. And just waves over her, and she greets him, Rabboni, teacher, master. Jesus sends her forth. He says, don't cling to me. Go and tell them. I will meet them in Galilee. Saying, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. He's now connected. It's not just his God. It's now their God as well. Then Jesus appears appears to them shortly after she arrives, in that evening. The greeting, peace be with you. Remember, they're agitated. They're a little scared. They think they're going to be arrested. They think they're going to be executed next. They do it for the head one. They're probably going to do it for the rest of them. Peace be with you, Jesus says, to calm them. He breathes on them in this first account. He gives them the Holy Spirit, he says. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain, they are retained. Justification for Catholic practice of confession of sins. Public, not fully public. Actual confession of sins to a priest. This authority given to the apostles that we believe is maintained in the clergy of the church. Now we get to probably the most famous of the resurrection appearances, Thomas. Thomas was one of the 11. John says 12, obviously Judas is not with them anymore. Called Didymus, or the twin. Was somehow not there at first night. So Thomas gets back, and there's all these other 10, and they're all excited. We see him. Thomas is like, whatever. There's no way. There's no way you've seen him. I will believe it, Thomas says, if I can put my fingers through his hand and put my hand in his side. I'll believe it then, he says. So, 8 days later, so the next week, on the first day of the week again, and their disciples are again in the house, Thomas is with them. So all 11 are there. The doors were shut. There's no way to get in. But Jesus comes in. Yeah, peace be with you. And he comes up to Thomas. He says, hey, put your finger here. Here's my side. Put your hand there. Do not be unbelieving, but believe. Thomas gives the only answer possible. My Lord and my God. Jesus praises those. He says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Now, John seems to bring things to an end here, verses 30 and 31. This great hyperbolic phrase. Jesus did many other signs. Many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. Believing, you may have, what does he desire for his audience? Life in his name. It's John's main focus. You may have life. How? You may have it in the name of Jesus. And yet, that's not the end of the story. Chapter 21, which some scholars argue is a later addition. They argue that, but there's very little. There's some perhaps internal evidence, but not much external evidence that it's later. So this is the last meeting of the risen Jesus in the Gospel of John, at least. He appears to 7 of them, and here's who all's there. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, Cana, the sons of Zebedee, who are James and John, and 2 others. I don't know who those 2 others are. Was that your question?
No, I was going to say, is that the James that wrote the...
Of course you can ask that. I can't remember at this point which James wrote the Epistle of James. I believe...
James, brother of Jesus, is what...
Yes, I believe that's James the Lesser.
Okay.
James the Greater is the brother of John, who is in that inner circle, Peter, James, and John. But that James actually, this James dies first. He was the first of the apostles to die after Judas, of course. So they're all still kind of, I guess, they don't know what they want to do. So Simon Peter says, I'm going fishing. He does what he knows best. I'm going fishing. They're all like, all right, we'll go with you. So they get out on the lake, just dudes catching some fish. Just a guy's day out on the lake, just trying to calm down. Anyone can go fishing, I don't want it. Please don't put words in my mouth. So they don't catch anything though. Typical men, typical fishers, don't catch anything. Jesus stands on the beach, but they don't know who it is. They never seem to know. They never seem to really recognize Jesus in his risen form. He's just so formal. He kind of cries out, hey, caught anything? No, we haven't caught anything. He says, throw it over the right side of the boat. Which seems incredible, like, why would you do this? Throw it over, you'll find some. Apparently they do. He says, John writes, they were not able to haul it in for the quantity of fish. So going from having caught nothing, they now catch so many fish, they can't do it. Even all 7 of these men, most of them, I think, these fishermen themselves, can't bring it in themselves. John writes, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Remember, he's not named in this line in verse 2. Which of course implies it's one of the sons of Zebedee. The disciple whom Jesus loved, of course, is John, says to Peter, it is the Lord. It's the Lord. Just excited, says Peter. Simon Peter, he puts on his clothes. Obviously, they don't want to work a sweat into their, so they're naked. Springs into the sea. He doesn't even wait for the boat to get to shore. Peter jumps in the water and goes to shore. Everybody haul in the boat. They drag the net full of fish. They keep dragging all the way. They're about 100 yards off. Jesus tells them to bring the fish to him. And what's interesting, you see verse here, 11 then. Simon Peter alone goes aboard and hauls the net ashore. Pretty incredible. It's incredible. John gives a number, 153. That seems very specific. Now, it could be argued that it's just John recalling the facts. Just the facts. We have caught 153 fish. Every fisherman wants to know how many fish they caught. There's also seen a symbolic meaning in it as well. This is seen to be the number of nations or people in the world at that time. I want to emphasize, obviously this doesn't mean the whole entire world, as in the Americas, as in far off Asia or far off Africa. This is obviously meaning the greater Mediterranean world. There were seen to be 153 different peoples, or nations, not perhaps as defined as they would be now. So kind of symbolizing the church bringing all peoples in. Bringing all peoples in. Jesus invites them to breakfast. He's got a fire burning. Got some fish already ready. He says, come and have breakfast. Eat up. They've been working all night. They're hungry. John writes, nobody asks anything, who are you? They knew. They get some bread, they get some fish. So just as Jesus fed the 5,000, so does he feed the 7. The author writes, this is the 3rd time. We've recalled only 2 before this. This is the 3rd time Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Then there is an interesting conversation between Peter and Jesus. Verse 15 and following. Jesus asks, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus seems to free him. He says, gives him a command, feed my lambs. Jesus asks again, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said the 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? He seems to be struggling something. And Peter says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. He said, feed my sheep. Jesus asks 3 times Peter to say that he loves him. Obviously, in contradiction to the 3 times that Peter denied Jesus. And that's what you could say, did not love him. What's interesting in the Greek has multiple words for love, for different types of love. We, of course, in our pitiful English language, have only love. So when he says, do you love me here, he uses the word agape. Do you love me completely and totally? Peter says here, you know that I philia. Like the beginning from Philadelphia. You know I love you, the love of friendship, the love of brotherhood. Not the same. So Jesus asked him, in a sense, it's like, do you love me this much? Peter's like, well, I love you this much. Jesus asked him again, do you agape me? He's like, no, I feel you. That 3rd time in the Greek, Jesus asks, Simon, son of John, do you philia me? Do you love me as a brother? You say that's also why Peter is grieved. Peter can't lift himself, seem to lift his love up more than that. Simon, son of John, do you love me at least that much? Simon Peter says, you know everything. You know that I feel you. So this is seen as a great act of forgiveness, mercy towards Peter by Jesus. To forgive, wipe away this great act of betrayal.
What is the word that John uses to describe himself as the Lord?
Oh, of course you would ask that. I do not recall at this moment.
Because to me it seems like this might be John going after Simon Peter.
I mean, maybe, probably when he says the beloved disciple, it probably may be in an agape way. I'll have to look it up and see.
Why couldn't John love Jesus absolutely?
Why couldn't Peter, you mean?
Yeah.
Peter apparently wasn't there yet. He was holding back for some reason, for some way. Maybe because he's still sorry for what he did. And, he's recognizing, I don't really love you as much as I should. I love you at least this much. Everyone looked in the commentaries on it. John then continues with Jesus predicting how it is that Peter will die. And perhaps this is being written after that's already happened. Most likely it has. It's dated in the 80s. Peter and Paul are said to have died about the year 67 or 68. So, when you were young, you girded yourself and walked where you would, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you wherever you do not wish to go. Because it is said that Peter died by crucifixion.
I always wondered what was Jesus saying when he said that.
What's that?
What I wondered when I heard that, when I was watching it, when I read it too, what did Jesus, is that what you were saying, like, because Peter died by crucifixion, or what did Jesus mean when he said that? You will be taken, when you're old, you'll be taken where you do not want to go.
You will stretch out your hands, crucifixion, stretch out your hands.
Okay, so basically
Girded.
Saying in a sense, or a metaphor, that he'll be crucified is the way that he'll die.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Interestingly, John makes the point is Peter then asks about the disciple whom Jesus loved. The one who had lain close to the breast of Jesus. We didn't talk about that much, but obviously the Last Supper is not done sitting at a table like you're sitting at your desks right now, or maybe sitting as you're watching. It is reclined. You recline on one another. So John is always said to be the one who reclined on Jesus. When Peter saw this disciple, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" So again, probably some, what's about him? Jesus said, "If it's my will for him to remain, what is it? Don't worry about him. Follow me." And everybody seems to misinterpret this, and this is probably like John as an old man going, "Oh, you don't think you knew better." Saying that the ground that this disciple was not to die. Jesus did not say that to him, but if it is my will that he remain, what is that to you? Jesus is just stating the question. Why do you worry about it? Don't matter. Then it ends. This is the disciple who is bearing witness to these things, and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. We know it because we know who he is. But there are also many other things which Jesus did, which were every one of them to be written, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Nice hyperbolic language, right? Just write wax poetic and eloquently on what happens with Jesus. So John does not end with any sort of account of the ascension of Jesus, but ends it with himself. I can write more. This is all you need to know. Remember, we talked about that at the very beginning of class. Everything in Revelation is everything we need to know for salvation. It may not be everything we want to know. We want to know things like what was the early life of Jesus like? What was his favorite food? Was he a carpenter as well? What did he do? How did he work that?
He actually invented the table and chairs.
Yeah, that's not how that works. You could say he knew them because he is the Word through whom all things came to be. So, in a sense, you may be right, but not in the smart alecky way that you're trying.
Jesus' resurrected form, his new body, was that the same one he revealed during the transfiguration?
Somewhat. So the the body of Jesus, we might have talked about this resurrection, but if not, and I receives what is known as the glorified body, which is his own, his original body, but yet elevated to a higher status. What do I mean by that? It is a body that is free from suffering, pain, and weakness, and sickness. It is a body that can no longer die. So it's sometimes termed, you can say, that being more real than his reality. Why? Because it is the body that will endure unto eternity. In the resurrected Jesus, we see a preview of what awaits us who believe and who hope for the general resurrection of the dead. We see in all of that what it is that we are longing and yearning for everlasting life. An answer?
How does that compare to the transfigured body?
The transfiguration is more of kind of demonstrating the divinity within. Remember, we talked about that. Some commentators call it the lack of a miracle, because we can see kind of the divinity shining through. We don't see the full face of God, but we kind of get a glimpse of that divinity. Jesus looks very human at every other point, other than that. He seems rather divine. So that's what it is. The transfiguration is kind of an opening of the veil, cracking opening the veil, but not the whole thing.
One last thing.
Yeah.
With each high Jewish priest, he had a slave. Why did he have a slave?
There was a time to have slaves. Anyone of wealth or power had slaves.
We think the Israelites who were slaves to the Egyptians.
But how long ago had it been since they had been slaves to Egypt? A few centuries, perhaps even a few millennia. So, and as always what happens, any of those in positions of authority always excuse themselves from the observance of the rules of the common people as well. All right? So, read up, we'll look into the Acts of the Apostles, and then an overview of the epistles. Obviously, you're supposed to be working on your epistles assignment. So, you're the specific ones that you have chosen. So get working on that. But we will do a brief overview of what are the epistles, what is happening in general in them, why are they so important. So, read up on the assignment, post on our website, and we'll see you next week.